So as we start tonight's session, thank you in advance, John and Brian, for your expertise. John is going to lead us off by looking at 1949 Leaf baseball from a legal, I'd say, and a historical perspective. John, could you tell us a little more about what brought you to Leaf in the first place, and then take it from there?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. Leaf is one of my absolute favorite sets. It is beautiful, it's mysterious, and it's something as someone from Chicago, I know was manufactured here in Chicago in a building that still exists in a different capacity. So I've been a baseball card fan since I was a small child. I've collected, I still collect. I'm sure there's several people on the call today that I've probably have been in a room with and opened packs of baseball cards. So I'm really looking forward to tonight. But I first kind of wanted to thank Brian Kappel and his book regarding Leaf for giving me the information on how to find the case that we're going to talk about today. There was in 1949 a lawsuit filed in Philadelphia. Bowman sued a or the distributor of Bowman cards out there, but there was really not much information available. There was a few tiny news stories about it. But after reading Brian's book and having a citation to a Cook County, Illinois lawsuit from 1949, Bowman versus Leaf, it just blew the doors wide open. I was able to get it from the Cook County archives. The papers were a good 3 or 4 inches thick. I have gone through them all and tried to figure out what each of them says so you don't have to. But this recently unearthed lawsuit really answers some questions about when that set was actually issued, and it's pretty cool. But I think kind of to get this started, unfortunately, you can all groan if you like to. I think it probably is something that makes sense to talk a little bit about the right to privacy and how it developed in the United States. So I'm just kind of want to go through that really briefly. And hopefully this will come up.
Looks great from
And
here. Thank you, John.
okay, good. Yeah, right before we got started, I apologize to Brian, who is a professional and very talented graphic artist that I just went to AI website and I put in, show me an archer, a bowman fighting a leaf. And this is what it came up with. So I'm really sorry about that, but I just thought it deserved a graphic. But that's essentially what happened. Bowman in this photo, it was this much smaller company. Leaf was huge, as we'll see. But kind of the origins to the right to privacy, before 1890, there really wasn't any law that existed that said if somebody took a picture of you that they could just use it if they wanted to. So in 1890, a Harvard Law Review article by Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis was issued. And basically, Samuel Warren is a guy who hated the press. He hated how intrusive they were. And Brandeis, you may or may not know, at some point later in his career, became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. But they were the ones that first put into the consciousness of the legal community, at least, a right to privacy, that people had a right to be left alone. And in this case, here, the next one you see Roberson versus Folding Box. The woman that's pictured there is Abigail Roberson. She's on vacation in 1900 with her family. She's a teenager at this point, and they go into a Vermont tavern. And on the wall in that tavern is this advertisement that's made by Franklin Mills for flour. And she goes, wait a second, that's me. What the heck is this? She had sat for some photographs at a studio where she lived in New York, and there was no explanation ever given, but at some point, Rochester Folding Box, who manufactured advertising, found this photograph and used it. So she was not happy about it. She went and filed a lawsuit, and the trial court said, yeah, here's $15,000, and that's approximately 475,000 today, a pretty significant amount. It went up to the next level, the appellate court affirmed, and then that went from there to the highest court in New York, And a 4-3 majority of the court said, nope, you have no cause of action. The photograph is not malicious and it's not defamatory. Essentially, your likeness has no value whatsoever. And so, based on a wave of public outcry, the very next year, the New York legislature passed legislation making it illegal or making it a civil matter if somebody uses your likeness without permission. But before this, there was no such law. So here in Illinois, 1922, we've got a pair of conjoined twins. The Blazek sisters came here from Eastern Europe. They were not only attraction, obviously, because of their conjoinedness, but they also played the violin and they toured all over the country. They kind of made their home base in Illinois. But you see the son there, Rosa, and I don't know which one of the two women pictured is actually the mother, but that is Franz Blazek. He was the son of Rosa. And basically, the promoters used his photograph like this one in all the advertising during the live performances. They would kind of put the spotlight on him, and he was pretty embarrassed by the tagline, son of two mothers. So he filed a lawsuit in 1922 against the sisters and their manager. And that lawsuit basically ended up in a court saying, yeah, the use of the photo was a valuable property right, and they issued a temporary injunction. This case, the Blazek case, is going to come up a little bit later here, but the case for Bowman versus Leaf is filed here in 1949. And in 1949, this law or this cause of action, right to privacy, is still in flux. And in Illinois, it's really not clear whether it applies or not. Around this time, there's several states that had either through case law or through legislation enacted enacted laws that said you need to pay for this privilege if you're going to use a photograph of somebody or their likeness. There were several states that said affirmatively, no, there's no right. They can use a photograph, whatever. Illinois is kind of not real clear at this point. But in 1941, about 8 years before the Leaf case, Johnny Mize lost a lawsuit when his objection to being used in the gum products double play cards fell flat in Massachusetts. So it's one of those things where each state kind of handles it differently. And so just a little bit about Bowman. Originally known as Bowman Incorporated, they produced the play ball sets. And you can see it kind of progresses from the black and white with no information. The middle one of Ted Williams is black and white, but now has his name on the front. And then the 1941 issue is the color issue. Unfortunately, as probably everybody on the call knows, bubblegum was discontinued during World War II because it used natural latex, and they needed that for other products. But when they decided to come back in 1948, Bowman contracted with 48 players that gave them the rights to issue the cards with their pictures on it for 1 year. And those cards down there you see of Musial and Mize, those were 48 of the players. That set was sold basically from June 1948 through September, and it was substantial. They sold in just those few months $361,000 worth of it, which is nearly $5 million today in revenue. It was a strange set, at least for me as a Chicago Cubs fan who collects Chicago Cubs cards, that there were no Cubs, there's no White Sox, there's no Red Sox, there's no Tigers, Browns, or Senators in the set. They just focused on 10 of the 16 teams at that point. But in 1949, Bowman went ahead, based on the success of their 1948 issue, contracted with 240 Major League ball players, also 36 PCL players, but I don't think any of those cards were ever issued. And this is the blank contract that was actually one of the exhibits in the lawsuit showing that each of the players was given $1 when they signed it and then 99 extra dollars on January 15th, 1949. Now, Leaf in 1949 was big. Their $8 million of annual revenue was over $100 million today. At that point, they were the world's largest producer of penny gumballs. and their subsidiary companies had manufactured gums and candies that were given away with, premiums going back to at least 1934. These are exhibits that are actually attached to the defendant's answer. And you can see this one here is a wrapper for the Dietz Gum Company Ball Players in Action set. If you look on trading card database, this is called something different, but this is actually a wrapper and the Rick Owens umpire card physically scotch taped to a piece of paper that's in the file. They also had the wrappers from the Overland Candy Company. This is Bill Nicholson. And this is a set that I think was a little bit interesting in its fact giving because Bill Nicholson, it says on this one, made 27 home runs, which amounted for a lot of runs batted in. Not only is it vague, but Bill Nicholson never had 27 home runs in a major league season, so it's a little bit off. And another exhibit that I found was this Dolph Camilli card. It's a 5x7 photograph, and the pleadings indicated that they were given away in 1941 and 1942, but I have not been able to find a copy of this in the trading card database for Mr. Camilli. I'm not sure if this is a premium, if this was an issued set. I have no idea what this is, but hopefully somebody in the chat maybe have seen something like this before and knows what it is. But again, Exhibit D is literally this 5x7 stapled to a piece of paper. So in 1948, we've got Leaf manufacturing football cards. So here's Sid Luckman. In 1948, Sid Luckman is a football quarterback for the Chicago Bears and is probably even 70 plus years later the best Bears quarterback in history. So, but I just kind of wanted to show these cards because 1948, you've got the football set. And if you look at the bottom, it says send wrappers and coin to Leaf Gum Company. It's got that copyright 1948. They also made boxing cards with the same thing at the bottom, send wrappers and coin to that same P.O. Box, Chicago 80, Illinois, copyright 1948. They made a set of pirate cards, not the Pittsburgh Pirates, but famous pirates. So I'm assuming everybody after this call is going to be on eBay looking for Captain Cracker's cards because this was just awesome, right? And then, of course, in 1948, they issued the Jolt and Joe DiMaggio. You can see copyright 1948 at the bottom there. Just kidding. I don't think that this was a 1948 issue, and that's part of what we're going to get into today. But as you can see, each of these four cards looks like it's the very same format at the bottom. Send wrappers and coin too, because each of them had an offer to get a pennant or some other a poster of the Bears or something like that. So the 1948 Leaf has two different copyright dates. And this is one of the reasons that there's been so much question about when this was actually issued. Again, Trading Card Database lists this as a 1948-1949 issue. And you'll see some of the cards. Jim Hegan on the left here, copyright 1948. Andy Pafko on the right, copyright 1949. But it's the same set. So looking at these cards, part of what was one of the original exhibits to the lawsuit was a 7x7 card, essentially, of the 49 cards that were issued in the first series. Unfortunately, that was not in the file. I wish it would have been. That would have been pretty cool to see. I assume because of the size of it, if it was on the file, it probably would have been folded. But in any event, the weird thing is if you look at the first sheet, there's 33 cards with the 1948 copyright and then 16 with the 1949 copyright. So they were mixed on the same sheet. And the second sheet, the short print sheet, again, 49 cards, 32 of them have the 1948 copyright, 17 have the 1949 copyright. So it's just kind of a weird anomaly that if this was really a 1948 issue, you would think that the 48s would all be on the first sheet. Maybe that second sheet was issued in 1949. But basically what happens is on March 14th, 1949, trucks start leaving Leaf's factory here on Cicero in Chicago. And on March 16th, 2 days later, this letter shows up at the offices of Leaf. We've been advised that you have knowledge of the existence of these exclusive contracts, but you're nevertheless now shipping and selling bubblegum packages containing pictures of ball players with whom our client has contracts. So this is interesting and important, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but the fact that Bowman is so quick, just days after that first shipment leaves Leaf to get their lawyers on the case, it's important to note that in this letter it says, nevertheless, you are now shipping and selling, which indicates that they know that it's recent. And so they filed their lawsuit on March 21st, which is Monday. So they sent the cease and desist on Wednesday. You can see that Bowman's secretary, Harry Shapiro, signed the verified complaint on Friday. And then on Monday, they filed the lawsuit. So if they had any hope that Leaf was going to follow their warnings and avoid litigation, it sure didn't seem like they were acting that way. They just went right ahead and got the lawsuit going. So they basically said that they knew about that Leaf knew about the player contracts, manufactured their cards anyway, and then they claimed that because Leaf had done this, it would leave them unable to sell their own cards and would push Bowman to the edge of financial ruin, which is something you pretty much have to assert if you want to try and get an injunction. So basically, Bowman's asking the court to stop Leaf from advertising, shipping, selling, offering for sale anywhere in the US their bubble gum in packages containing pictures of baseball cards that were listed in their complaint, and also, of course, monetary damages. One of the original plaintiffs to the lawsuit was Johnny Mize, who had some experience from that case in 1941 that he had lost earlier. But as far as the lawsuit is concerned, Bowman is just full steam ahead. So now Leaf comes in, they file their answer, and they say, wait a second, like we just talked about a little bit, there's no right to privacy that comes attached to the ball players. They're public figures, and information about them is news value that's for the purchasers of the gum. They denied that Bowman could legally enforce the exclusive contracts they had with the baseball players. They also claimed that the photographs that they had were purchased from advertising agencies, from photographers, and they could use them because they had actually already been published before. They also said that Bowman hadn't complained about Leafs 1948 football issue, and that Topps had issued their Hocus Pocus set. You could see the Lou Boudreau on the right there and the wrapper. And again, this is the actual Lou Boudreau card taped to a piece of paper in the file. And at this point, Bowman and Leaf are fighting over when things have been issued. But now Leaf is saying that their Bowman or that their baseball series had been on the market for just a couple of weeks. And they had no knowledge that the defendants they had no knowledge that the corporate plaintiff, that Leaf, or that Bowman, that Bowman had ever placed a sale or placed their cards on sale. So some of the court documents show that Leaf put their cards in the market on March 14th, that Bowman first issued their cards and started to ship on March 15th. And now we know for a fact that the cease and desist letter was sent on March 16th. So it's all happening very quickly. Obviously, right before the start of the baseball season, they want to get these into the candy stores. So what happens is on April 25th, 1949, all of the documents, their briefs are sent to a master. His name is Henry Passion. And Passion is not a judge, but basically what he's doing is, or Herbert Passion, sorry. What he's doing is acting on behalf of the court to take in evidence He's going to hear oral argument, and that takes 2 days, May 2nd and 3rd. And then he's going to put together a report for the judge to look at that kind of tells all of the facts about the case and goes through the arguments, and then finally is going to give the judge his opinions as to who wins. So Passion goes through all of the evidence, the oral arguments, and finds that there's no showing that Leaf had obtained those photographs by fraud, that the photographs Leaf used had no restrictions printed on them, that the pictures were not defamatory, that those photos and information about the baseball players constituted that news value and also gave the players free publicity. And although Bowman had claimed that the right to privacy had been established in that Blazek versus Rose, the conjoined twin son case, they found that the official court opinion had actually gone missing. They couldn't find it. It was nowhere to be found. And then under those circumstances, they had no idea what the court had ruled, the reasons that the court had ruled the way they did, and all they had was information that was reported secondhand. Like I said earlier, there was conflict between the states as to the right of privacy. And ultimately, Herbert Passion found that Leaf had not violated any law of the state of Illinois and recommended that the case be dismissed. So now this goes to the judge. Judge Frank Patton took the report under advisement, and then he issued his written ruling on January 20th, 1950, long after the 1949 baseball card sales season would have ended. And does anybody know what happened? Completely ignored the master's opinions. He found that Leaf had no right to use those photographs for commercial or advertising purposes without their consent. And as a result, granted Bowman the permanent injunction they wanted. That gave Leaf perpetual prohibition from shipping or selling chewing gum with pictures of ball players that they didn't have permission to use. And some of you may know that Leaf finally did get back into the baseball card business very briefly in 1960, but there was nothing then after the 1949 set. So in the case, within those documents, there are several things that offer evidence that this was a 1949 only issue. And I think it's pretty clear from this is one of the promotional cards that was in the file. You can see here it says over 300 major league stars from this year's squads. And as you look down under the player, you see it's copyright 1949, which would seem consistent. This year's squads 1949, not 1948. And with regard to the way that the set was put together, you may know that there were 98 cards that were eventually issued. They're skip numbered. And the original plan, at least according to these promotional materials, was that Leaf planned to do over 300 cards, a full-size set. With regard to that cease and desist order, it's pretty clear based on the timing that the way that the letter was issued just days after they found that Leaf had started shipping their cards, it's clear that Leaf would have issued that if they found out that cards were being issued in 1948. Again, that letter says that they are now shipping and selling. It doesn't say, we understand you've been shipping and selling for months or whatever, and anything like that. What's pretty important is that Bowman made no allegations in any of the documents that Leaf had distributed that set prior to 1949. And the most significant is that Leaf admitted that it began distributing those cards on March 14th, 1949, in the verified answer that was signed and sworn to by Marshall Leaf, the vice president of the company. The graphic on the right here shows, and it's split onto 2 pages, so the way that I took photographs of them, I don't know why they didn't come out to be the same color, but in any event, you can see it says very clearly, defendants admit that on or about March 14, 1949, they shipped into Boston for sale bubble gum containing photographs and names of baseball players. And then this is the verification at the end. Again, this is under, you know, threat of perjury. Marshall Leaf is saying that he swears that this is all true. So under these circumstances, I think it is absolutely clear, crystal clear, that Leaf was not distributed in 1948. It should be a 1949 only issue. And otherwise, I think that it is really an awesome set otherwise, right? So if you wanted to read a little bit more about this case, this was just kind of a quick and dirty overview. SABR Baseball Cards blog, you could read the article about debunking the myth of 1948 baseball or 1948 Leaf. And if you have any interest in any other baseball card litigation, I wrote a series of articles that are on the Baseball Cards blog called Death and Taxes and Baseball Card Litigation. It's a four-part series. If you have 2 or 3 months to read it, it's pretty long. But if you have more desire to look into that stuff is on the blog. And I'd also recommend too that you look at the blog and figure out whether there's other articles that you think might be helpful for the baseball card community like us. We love to read that stuff, and I would just, you know, recommend that everybody maybe dip their toe, write an article for the committee. But that's really about it. I appreciate you listening, and if you have questions, I think we'll have some time to talk about it after Brian goes. Thanks.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, John. And I appreciate that mention. It is true that we've covered a wide range of subjects on the SABR Baseball Card blog. And you can do something as simple as search for a set or a year or team you recognize, and several things are going to come up, I guarantee it. Some of them long, some of them short, some of them personal, some of them technical. John covers a range of years and some things with long-term impact that continue to resonate in how baseball cards are made today, the type of contracts players enter into, and who does and does not have the ability to print cards. I'd love to hand the baton next to Brian, who has taken this into a narrative level, well beyond what you might find in a case file. Brian, please give us a quick intro and then pick up your work on R.E. Leaf.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for SABR for the invite to kind of come and share the work that I did on putting together my book, which is called Relief. Um, and then also thanks to John as well for I told him several times in our conversations leading up to this that this was a thrill for me as a design guy who read a legal document and got it right. So that was a thrilling moment for me, a victory for those of us who just draw pretty pictures. Like I said, my name is Brian Kappel. I wrote the book Relief that basically was prompted by a lifetime of collecting baseball cards and stumbling across the Leaf set probably about 8 years ago when I was looking for almost like an heirloom set to pass down to my kids, and there was this great serendipitous moment that the copyright dates actually aligned with both my parents' birth date and my in-laws' birth date, and so it was a perfect thing to then hand off to my kids. As I got into it, as often happens, you realize that there's more to the story than just that kind of initial look at the bright colors and the great compositions. And I think what happened with me was that I started getting in and you start hearing what the industry says and what the people on the blog say and what the common misconceptions or lore of the set is. And I always have been one to ask why. Why is this important? Why is that the way that it is? Is this just accepted? And so uh, it started me running down the rabbit hole and doing a lot of research. And so touched on everything that John had, which was actually kind of late entry in my research process. I had spent a good 2 years, and a big thank you to my family, my dad, my kids, and all that stuff, and everyone whose ear I chewed off about theories that I had about the cards, because the actual distribution date is one part of it, but then there's more to the story as well, because there's a lot of industry lore that goes into and leans into the actual production of the cards. Two things real quick from John's statements that I do want to kind of close a loop on is first of all, the 1960 cards. the agreement came down that basically Leaf was not to produce cards until 1951. When they did produce in 1960, the interesting part of that was to try and once again in classic Leaf style to dance outside of what they were and weren't allowed to do. They actually distributed those cards not with gum, but with marbles. And that's how they got away from any kind of flack from anybody else, because at that time they had actually reached out to Topps, who by that point had crushed Bauman, and basically said, "Yeah, let's partner up." And Topps basically, said to Leaf, "You put it with gum, we're going to do the same thing to you." And then also kind of going back to the legend and the lore, if you go onto the backs of the cards, even the cards that have 1948 copyrights, there's a lot of things. I'm a big read the back of the baseball card kind of guy. And if you start digging in on that, you'll find that the statistics that are actually put on the 1948 cards are statistics from the 1948 season. So it would be like current cards reference back one season. That happens on there. And then there's also trades that happened in December, and so the thing that I do when I talk about Leaf is the main point about Leaf itself is it was a candy company. There was no intent to make it, that they were going to be a baseball card company. This was a vehicle for them to sell more candy, and that's what they did. They used it for that, for selling candy. And so when you start putting together the dates that kind of came up, including the dates that the MVP awards were issued, which was in late November, trades that happened in December, all of a sudden you've kicked the can into the point where a candy company is working on Christmas product and not worried about a baseball set that would later be distributed in March. So that's that for a kind of level setting. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into, as I started going through the actual set itself, you start kind of getting into the design and production variations, because I think a lot of what I said about the folklore around the actual set itself is that there are these kind of notions of errors, variations, and what are the true variations and what are more because of the way that they produce the cards. And so Leaf itself, in that same document that John had been talking about, they actually went through and they said that they had actually purchased equipment so that they could produce the cards in-house. The Overland and the Dietz cards were actually farmed out to other printers inside of Chicago. And so I think that what they did was they realized as they were printing their own candy boxes that they could actually put cards through and print those. And so that's what they did. So in my book, I actually do have actual candy boxes from late 40s. And you can see that the stock is exactly the same. So they were using things that were at arm's length to produce the cards, including the printing presses, which were done in-house. And the one thing that I found is, again, it's an offset printing, it's a lithography, it's a four-color process by which you're laying down one color as the sheet goes through and stacking it up. Now, what happens is during the production process, if there's any problems of alignment or if it's just being done haphazardly, that's where you get the registration issues that are just, run rampant through all the Leaf sets. And so originally I had thought, well, maybe it was a four-color machine, or maybe it was a two-color machine that they were running it through two-color presses, changing the ink as they went. But there's been some recent things that I've come across, and and it's great, since the book has come out, people have actually sent a lot of images of cards. And what I found is that there are cards out there that have only one color that's been flipped, which would speak against running it through a two-color process. So basically, they would run all of the blue plates, pull them all out, let them dry, run it through the yellow, run it through the red, run it through the black. So that is what's caused a lot of the problems with registration and a lot of problems with the cards being miscut and being printed upside down and all of those things. So it's a very simple process, and it's very easy to kind of understand where those printing errors actually happened. As you dig into the cards, and anybody who knows the cards knows that there's a lot of different color shades that you kind of get into with them. And so a lot of people, including my interactions with a lot of the grading companies, reference this first, where they say, well, it's actually not a variation. We know about the color variations. So I did have the opportunity to speak to my great uncle, who was actually a print press operator during the late 1940s. And he said, as we showed him the examples of the cards, that he was basically, that Leaf was essentially getting whatever ink they could get from their distributor and putting that on press. And that's what led to the variations in the colors and the tones. So if you look at the Stan Musial on that top row there, you see three different cards with three different blues. And what that is that whatever the distributor had that day, that's what they put on press, that's what they ran the cards with. So it's not technically a variation. It's just a byproduct of using whatever was on the shelf and whatever went into the cards. If you look at the second row there of the Joe DiMaggios, again, you see this wide variance of, the greens, which is essentially the halftones of the yellows and the blues being combined together to create the green. The second card in, you see that there's no green. It's just all blue. And what that is that essentially the key gate that they ran the yellow ink through had gone dry. And so with no yellow, it turned to blue. And so that's one thing that you do see a lot. And it's actually recognized more, especially by the grading companies in the football set than it is in the baseball set. There's no recognition of it in the baseball set, but there is in the football set. The one variation that I did and do focus on in the book itself is the one that has the asterisk at the end there. And that's the Joe DiMaggio that has a blue hat. Because what that represents is an actual physical change to the printing plate that is only recognized by one card in the industry as itself. These are the three cards right now that are currently recognized by the industry as the errors in the Leaf set. The Hermansky, the Aberson, and the Peterson. Now, the Hermansky, I believe, and this is, I'm a big contributor on Net54, and there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions on there. And I think the Hermansky was really more of a byproduct of its position on the printing, where it actually sat on the sheet when it was printed, and the fact that the eye was a vertical, because you can actually find Hermansky's where the I is part there. You can see it where the K is actually being bit into. And I think what it was a buildup of the red ink as it was being pulled, that sometimes it would just fill in. So that one, because in typical form of when Leaf would change things, they would actually do a good job from a design standpoint of centering things. So you wouldn't correct Gene Hermansky's name to have it be wrong and not have it be centered, if that makes any sense whatsoever. The Aberson was an early variation that was corrected early in the process. So as far as I can see it, there was actually of the main set, there was the initial printing. The Aberson was fixed somewhere in the middle, and then there was a late printing. And in that late printing, that's what's represented by the Kent Peterson there, is that they went through and they actually removed details from the printing plate in order to make the hats brighter. And they also added color to the other plates, which meant that they actually had to go through and either remove the details from the black plate with a solvent or some other method, but then they also had to change the color printing plates to add the details on. And I go into that in the book, and it's actually the center part of the book is actually in reference to that. So if anyone has an interest in seeing what those actually look like, the centerpiece of the book itself, it actually has side by side just like this on all of them. But I did go through and pull out the Musial just to kind of show. And what I tried to do was basically pull out the red and the yellow and leave just the blue and the black in there so that you can see side by side that on the top version, which is the main printing, you can see that the black is present in the hat. And then in the bottom version, you can actually see where the detail was removed from the cap in order to make that variation of a red cap Musial. Now, I pulled just a couple of the heavy hitters, the big names from that original set here, that you can see these actual changes as they apply. 30 of the 49 cards on that sheet had some kind of change made to them, and some of them are very small, but most of them are in relation to the hat colors. And so on Babe Ruth, though the hat color was actually left in there, what you see is an addition of the two red lines that connect the background color to the nameplate. And so that's an additive process. That's a physical change to the printing plate, thereby making it a variation. Same thing with the, we talked about the Stan Musial. The Warren Spahn actually has all the hat details removed. Joe DiMaggio, again, has the hat details removed, just like the Kent Peterson. And then Jackie Robinson has the hat details removed, but then also has two yellow lines that connect the background to the nameplate. So on top of, again, the kind of folklore around the leaf set itself, there was an actual set that kind of sits in between the main issue and then the short print, which, in my opinion, the short print happened and was distributed uh, more because they were just trying to get rid of product they had already printed. So in my mind, this goes that there was the main printing. There's this late printing where it's an actual variation, and then you have the short print, which are super hard to come by. So just kind of recapping a little bit of what John said, but then I also want to leave plenty of time for questions. The timeline, as I kind of went through and did all the research that we did, the Pirate set was released first, and again, not the Pittsburgh Pirates, more the Scallywags type Pirates. Because the interesting thing happens with the Pirate sets is that as I started, because again, this was a project, a passion project for me, but at the same time, I'm also a collector. I also have just an absolutely tragic leaf addiction right now. And so I'm going out there and trying to buy as many of these as I possibly can. When I started buying the pirate cards, they started coming in without numbers on them, which is an interesting kind of wrinkle in the Leaf story. And so therefore, I believe that they were released first because I think that the first issue of Leaf without the numbers, they came back and said, you know what, kids will chase these if you put a number on the back and they have a set to work against. And so then you see a change happen where they take and they rekern the top and the titles on the back and they add the numbers in. Now, skip numbered they were, as were all the sets except for the 1948 football set, which is the only true numbered Leaf set. It runs from 1 to 98. And then Knockout Boxing set was released, 49 card set was released in December of 1948. Then you have the baseball set released in March, the lawsuit, then the injunction that happened in May of 1949, which essentially shut down distribution outside of Philadelphia and most of the East Coast. And that's why I think you see a lot of the short print cards were distributed in the Great Lakes. And then you have the 1949 football set, and then they were shut down. And so that really kind of is the overarching, very simplified arc of how Leaf kind of did what they did and when they came out and hit the market. And so it's a fascinating story. And it's, again, what I touch on in the book itself is me going through and kind of discovering all these elements and trying to kind of wire them all together and be like, okay, well, here's a story that actually makes sense on how this all worked. And then literally, I think it was 2 weeks before I went to press on distributing the book, is when I came across the actual lawsuit paperwork. Thanks to Nathaniel Groh, who was the one who kind of tipped me off to that as I was going through it, validated a bunch of the theories that we had, from everything from subsidiary products all the way through to the fact that everything was indeed printed in-house. So it's a great journey. It's a great story. It's a great set, and it's this fascinating crossroads of baseball history that's kind of encapsulated in this 98 card set that tells a story that, you know, goes as far back as you know, John Honus Wagner, who, you know, in baseball lore and everything with the T206 set is, you know, packing his mouth full of tobacco on his card as a manager for the 49 set to basically a memorial card for Babe Ruth, who passed away in August of 1948, all the way through to Jackie Robinson, Satchel Paige, Larry Doby, whose, you know, essentially first cards kind of came out that were the non-regional issues. So it's a set that I fell in love with, and I think everything else that kind of goes around the story of how and why it came to be is really fascinating, and one that I really enjoyed kind of digging into.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Brian. We have a number of things that have come up during Q&A. I will head that off by saying, first, if we don't get a chance to get everything here, we will follow up with additional commentary. And I encourage everyone here who does have questions or interest or expertise to think about how you could use that and give us feedback on sessions similar to this in the future. So that's the general overview. I'm going to hit these things as they came in. First, question from Jamie. Can you say more about what it was that Bowman won? Did they primarily win damages, injunctive relief? Was there more to it? Can you summarize what they saw in the court of law?
Yeah, essentially what they won was the injunction. That's the big thing. preventing Leaf from manufacturing, shipping, and selling those cards. There were some references in the information that I looked through that said that the matter was going to be referred back to that master, Herbert Passion, to assess damages, but there was no more paperwork in the file about whether that ever happened, which is one of two things as far as I'm concerned. One, the file, as thick as it was not complete. There was references to additional master's reports that were just not contained within there. One of the interesting things was that there was a motion filed well after the lawsuit ended by the attorneys asking to get back their original exhibits, which included all of the signed contracts from 1949 Bowman. So it would have been pretty cool to see all those signatures in there. But it's either that the paperwork is missing, it just didn't make it, it somehow got tossed out and didn't make it to the archives, or it's settled out of court and there's just nothing further. But I don't know about any monetary damages. The big thing was the injunction.
Great, thanks. Next we have, and anyone with hands raised, keep them up. I will make sure to get to those two. I'm going through chronologically what we had in chat first. Next one was from Roy. Why did Leap have a 1960 issue? And I think you touched on this. They had a 60 issue, and how did it relate to this judgment in 49?
Yeah, like Brian kind of touched on, there was some back and forth between Leaf and Topps after this lawsuit. The piece that Bowman got with that permanent injunction literally lasted 1 year. They had 1950, they were the only major release. Then all of a sudden in 1951, here comes Topps with their team cards and the blue and the red backs. So everything was in flux. Part of the theme of the death and taxes and baseball card litigation is essentially that there has been ongoing litigation since 1940s about baseball cards. And as it sits, Leaf was able to, in 1951, start producing cards again if they wanted to, but they didn't. I don't really know the reasons why they didn't, but it was that 1960 set. It's that black and white set. It's beautiful. Those are cards where they went and got rights from those players. They signed them up and paid them to put them on cards. And they sold them with marbles, just like Fleer used cookies. And that's why Donruss has puzzle pieces in their set in their card packs, and Fleer has stickers in their card packs. It's all about selling cards with gum, selling cards with another premium. So it's all very interesting and intertwined.
Okay, and next up, James asked us for a quick review and refresh then on the Bowman versus Leaf side. I gave him the fastest version I could, which was Bowman went after player contracts, Leaf went after marketing photos, and that's how the two ended up clashing in court. Could you restate that with a little more detail so everyone is clear on it?
Yeah, basically 1948, when Bowman got back into the baseball card business, they had contracts. They went through a player agent, Art Flynn. They signed all of these players to contracts that gave them for $100 1 year of exclusive rights to pictures and likenesses, biographical information for their cards. That 1948 set was a success enough that they decided to do it again in 1949. They went out and signed 240 players and 36 players from the Pacific Coast League. And what Leaf thought was, well, we can do that, and we could spend, $24,000 to get those player rights. We could spend another 12 to get a player agent, or we could just kind of circumvent this all and say, well, this is news value. It's no different than publishing a magazine or a newspaper. We're giving a photograph of the player. We're giving biographical information on the back. And so they just tried to get around it by saying that they didn't need to get any permission from the players, that there was no right to privacy in Illinois. But essentially for the same reasons that Johnny Mize lost that first lawsuit in Massachusetts, the reasons that that judge gave, the opposite happened in Illinois. So it's basically a lot of times, and this is just kind of a general thing from state to state, from county to county, from judge to judge on the same motions floor in Cook County, you're going to get different rulings based on the exact same set of facts. So.
And I'll jump on top of what John just said. I actually found an interview with Marshall Leaf, who was the vice president who signed the documents that John reviewed, speaking about his father, Solomon Leaf, who was the founder of the Leaf Company. And essentially, in not so short of words, Saul said that he was never going to pay athletes for using their likeness. So he was not a big sports fan and never saw the value in paying athletes for their likeness. So he was the original violator of the NIL deals.
Great, thanks. Thanks each of you. Steve asked about something that is very image related and card almost infamous for cards. Here you have a Leaf card that shows Wagner dipping tobacco. The legend of the T206 Wagner is that he did not necessarily want to be shown connected to tobacco, and that's why that card ended up being so scarce. Do you each have thoughts on that contrast?
I love it. I think it's one of the little quirky things that, those of us who are card heads and love getting into the lore of everything, that represents, I think, a fun little note, the if you know, if you know type thing where it's like, everything that went around the T206 and then him literally just packing his mouth full of tobacco is just hilarious to me.
Yeah, and I'll put in a little bit of a lawyer spin on this. I thought that his objection was to smoking tobacco as opposed to chewing tobacco. So maybe it's just splitting hairs, but one is good, one's bad. I have no idea.
Okay. How about your another Stephen question after that? How about your best take on why 48 appears as a date on the cards when it does?
I think that's when they started work on it. I think that the work commenced in 48. I think they were in the full process. And it's one of the things that I do touch on is this idea of there are cards that exist out there from different sets, as well as the baseball set and as well as the boxing set, that I think they had produced salesman samples early in 48 to kind of go out there. Because again, if you go fast forward into the 80s, Donruss buys Leaf because of their distribution channels. They were a monster back in those days. And I think that very much part of what they were known for was, knocking on doors and getting their product on shelves. And so I think that the work had commenced in 48 on those cards. And I think that they just kept either out of, what John pointed out is they kept the footer of those cards the same just for the sake of keeping it the same, or it was something that the work commenced in 48 and finished in 49 right before they started distributing.
Okay, thank you. General questions around grading, I want to leave to a little bit later because I want to get to the hands that we have. But I promise we'll get to that, at least a general comment on grading in this set. Let's go to Mark first. I think, Mark Oil, you had your hand up first. And let's see. You are muted right now. Can you unmute?
There we go. Am I good?
Yeah. Yes.
I put the Red Sox set together of this, and I've had one card that's been, I can't really find it on the checklist. And I don't know if John could help me out with this. I just can't see.
Oh, Tony C.
It has somebody's
card.
initials on the back, JR. I don't know who that could be.
I like that.
That's a mystery.
So, John, was that a custom that was passed along? Looks
It
great.
was. It
Yeah.
was.
Very nice. Jason, you are up next.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. Great job, guys. John, question for you. It seems to me if there were an unscrupulous attorney, and I know that's an oxymoron, but if there were, they could check out that big stack you checked out, and they could pocket some really cool cards and wrappers and whatever that I think would have pretty significant monetary value. So I'm just curious, in that whole process of you being able to check out all the legal papers, do they compare what you brought back to what they gave you, or is it really the case that somebody could go in and essentially just take whatever they want out of the file?
Well, first off, doing that's a felony.
For sure.
So you probably don't want to do that. And the archives keep a record of who checks it in and out. So if someone was to go in after this and say they want to steal what's in there, next time I go look at it, it's going to be good to see who did it. So yeah, I don't know if you're trying to be funny or not, Jason.
No.
It's a felony, and it would be really silly to try and get away with that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely wasn't trying to be silly. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
worried because I feel like that stack is a national treasure, but maybe it's not uh, as guarded as it might be. I think there was an instance where in the old days you could go to the New York Public Library and check out their reference materials, which were like really old baseball cards, you know, T206, 19th century, whatever. And there were a lot of cards that disappeared because people realized they could just grab these books full of baseball cards and take some in the library and wouldn't notice, you know,
Yeah.
and they lost a lot of stuff.
Hey, Jason, to that point, when we went to the Chicago History Museum, they have a lot of the effects from Marshall Leaf's estate. And within that, there are football and boxing cards that are in there as well. And I kind of thought the exact same thing. There was no baseball, but they did have uncut sheets of a lot of the non-sport things that they did later on. And I was like, boy, oh boy, this would be tragic if someone went in there and had sticky fingers on it.
Brian, there was no baseball anymore.
Yes, no baseball.
Great job, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thanks.
thanks. Ryan, you are next up.
Hey, this has been great. Thank you so much for doing this. So I did a 23-page article on Johnny Mize's his lawsuit, and this uh, kind of backed up something that I had talked to somebody at the Suffolk Superior Court, in which they couldn't find Johnny Mize's or the lawsuit paperwork. They said they don't know where it is. So to me, that's kind of strange because that's like the first case that I'm aware of a ball player actually suing um, for over right of privacy. Secondly, uh, uh, did these cards actually go through the patent office? Was there any paperwork associated with that?
No, I mean, as far as the first part about the Johnny Mize lawsuit, in these cases that are handled at the county level, especially cases from the 40s, it depends a lot on the archivist that works in each county. If it's not a case with a reported decision on it, an appellate decision or a Supreme Court decision, a lot of times getting your hands on the paperwork actually means going to the archives, putting in a submitted order for it, and going back. So the fact that parts of this case were missing, that case we referenced, the Blazek versus Rose case, that case was all missing too. It's not surprising. It's unfortunate that Johnny Mize case is missing from Massachusetts, but I agree with you. I think in my research, that's the first baseball card related lawsuit ever. And um, as far as your second question, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't remember what it was.
Oh, did the cards go through the patent office
Oh,
at all?
patent office. Yeah, patent is really only going to be probably for baseball cards more related to technologies, either printing technologies. I know Upper Deck did a lot with putting a hologram on the back of it. The patents really don't have to do with the cards themselves. So there, as far as I know, there would be no patent information available for at least 49 Leaf.
Okay, I know Gowdy went through the patent office as well.
Yeah.
And then going back to Johnny Mize, so there were two judges on that case, and the first one agreed with Johnny Mize, but he ended up actually going overseas during World War II. And then the second judge said to Johnny or his lawyer that because he was a baseball player, he was an entertainer, and therefore uh, he um, he basically requested um, to do that job. Nobody forced him to do so, so that's why he lost. So
Yeah.
uh, excellent job here, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The Natalie-clad Chris Burns, I believe, is next chronologically.
Thank you. This has been really good. I think it was John that mentioned the fact that, and this is a good point, that Leaf was in the candy business and they sold gumballs and the gumball machines, which got me reminded that years ago I picked up from somewhere some header cards from the 1 cent Leaf machines. They just happen to have them handy here. So this is the header card from the penny gumball machines. See, they weren't averse to baseball as such, as long as they didn't have to pay anybody else for their image. But here are a couple that I don't know if you can actually see that, but yeah, Play Ball, Leaf. These are probably from the maybe the late 60s or early 70s. But yes, Leaf, a candy company. This has been really interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Chris,
Yeah.
just a little fun tidbit too is that Marshall's wife actually did a lot of the graphic design of that
Wow.
1960s, late 50s type stuff. So it was
It's
literally
pretty
an
good.
in-house deal.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. And Chris, if you could even fire a good either a link to or a picture of that afterward, I'm happy to put it in the notes so people see what we're looking at. Dixie, thank you for your patience. You are next up.
Fine, thank you very much. Great presentation, guys. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Just proving once again that everything concerning baseball will get to lawyers sooner or later. I'm just wondering, since we're talking about 1948, 1949, does anyone know what the print number was for all these sets of cards? Does
Nope.
anyone have any idea?
I've long said that they printed the cards as a swing shift thing, that they were on press at night because they were printing candy boxes during the day. And I think that they just tried to crank through as much product as they possibly could.
Yeah, the only thing that I was able to find in the lawsuit about it was an affidavit from a Bowman representative who was at a candy wholesaler in Chicago and saw 1,000 boxes of 49 Leaf in the warehouse. I don't know what that translates to in terms of the total print run, but there was pretty significant amount at that point. And also it said that a box sold at wholesale for 72 cents. So you could buy a case for $14.40. So about 190 bucks today, but man, would it be fun to have a few of those in the closet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Roy, I saw you drop in there asking what is at the old Leaf building on Cicero these days. Is that known?
I don't know, but Jason and I have actually talked about going to swing by just to get a picture in front of it. I expect it's probably still some kind of manufacturing facility, but I'm not really sure.
Okay. I see Jason is encouraging you to check the dumpster that's shown there in case there's any Leaf cards at the bottom of it.
Right.
And Rich asked to clarify, are we talking patent or copyright when we talk about the offices that handle these officially? You mentioned, I believe, patent a second ago.
I mean, as far as patents concerned, that has to do with the technologies. There could be a design patent for a physical object. The copyright is going to be something different. It's two different sections of intellectual property. And I don't know that there was actually ever any copyright filings either. I haven't looked into that, but typically that's just going to be for something like this, logos or something about the design itself, as opposed to copywriting the back of every single one that they do. They typically don't do that.
And that's true across subjects. To pick out a couple things you mentioned before, true of a boxer, true of Captain Crackers off the Pirates set, all of those things handled in a similar way, or is this different because you're looking at a baseball player versus something else?
I would expect that for the Leaf cards that were produced, regardless of what the topic was, that they didn't get any patents on any of them and they never filed any copyright paperwork. I haven't looked into it, but that would be my assumption based on what I've seen in my research so far.
I did a layman search on copyrights and never found anything that was associated with Leaf.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I will leave a meaningful pause here for anyone to say, hey, you didn't answer my question.
I was curious, like how many cards were in the 48, 49 Leaf too, but did Ted Williams get a card?
At 49 Leaf, yes, he's got a card.
And is that considered like the Satchel Paige rookie card or anything?
No, he had earlier cards. Mark Hoyle probably is the guy to answer this.
Yeah, hold that one up
Yeah.
again there, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's the 49 Leaf. He's got at least a 39 play ball I know of, but
Oh,
I'm not sure what else is older than that.
Thanks. Great job.
Yeah, that 49 Williams is, and this is coming from a diehard lifelong Yankee fan. I think that Ted Williams card in the Leaf set is what I would classify as the perfect baseball card. From pose to strength of color to everything else, that the card's got a lot going on with it.
Matt, put me on the screen. I got one up.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
let me see if I can I pin you there? There you go. I can angle it just a little bit, but yeah, it's such a terrific image in pretty much every way.
Yeah, it's iconic.
Yeah.
Mm.
A little bit of a glare.
Yeah. Let's cover one more thing briefly, I think, from each of you, and that's one reason that I think you need to talk about dating and that you talk about some of the other things. And there have been a couple questions addressed here. It has to do with the way that modern collecting also goes through grading, and valuations can be set by what is the earliest possible card for a player. What does that mean when you're 1 year difference on either side when you're talking about a first card versus a second card versus some future card? How do you think about grading, or did you address grading at all when you were doing your own work and research? I'll go to Brian first since he was the author.
Okay. So, grading, and it's the conundrum that I think is probably the hot topic right now, and Jason can speak to it as well, is that, with establishing this set as a 49 set, now you've thrown in the proverbial monkey wrench into the whole system here, because now, Jackie Robinson, technically that's not considered a rookie card anymore because it's a 49 issue. And the same could be said for several other cards that are in the set. But then you start going down again the wonderful and glorious rabbit holes that we all love in the hobby. Is like, you take someone like Stan Musial, and they're like, well, the 48 Bauman is technically his rookie card, so now this is a 49 Stan Musial. It's no longer his rookie card. But then, you have other issues out of Cuba that come in 47 and 46 that says, well, that's the rookie card. So I think that it really comes down to it. And the one that I kind of throw at people who, get upset. Well, first of all, I say, well, I devalued my Jackie Robinson too, because I've got one, so now it's a 49 as well. But it's like, if you take the example of Mickey Mantle, everybody in the industry considers, the 52 tops to be the holy grail and the rookie card. Whereas there's a 51 Bauman that came out a year beforehand. So I think that it really comes down to personal preference and what you kind of feel. I mean, if you want to get into the technicals, the Leaf cards hit the market just before the Bauman cards in 49, so they're still hitting the market before the Bauman cards. So I think it's not a cut and dry answer, because it's really within the hobby itself. It's not a cut and dry definition, or so it seems. It really comes down to personal preference, and do you see regional issues as rookie cards, or is it the main national issues become the first of the card for the whatever player you're talking about?
Yeah, John, what's your take?
There was very little in the paperwork from 1949 about PSA. So,
Shocking.
shockingly, I mean, it's really just a personal preference. I am the kind of guy that I have a handful of graded cards that I've left in their plastic simply for purposes of authenticity. Most of the other graded cards that I've purchased over the years, I've cracked them out of the case and they are in my binder. So that's kind of where I sit on it. As far as rookie cards are concerned, I really stopped giving much thought to that a long time ago. I probably in the 90s. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest thing about baseball cards is you could collect whatever you want to collect. If you value something, go for it. If you don't value something, don't collect it. So that's the greatest thing about the hobby, is there's so much variety. You can do whatever you want. But as far as the value being affected by whether it's a 48 or a 49, I get that. It's significant, but I think telling the truth and discovering the truth is more important than that.
Yeah, to quote the famous and completely real person, Indiana Jones, we focus here on fact. Truth is taught down the hallway in philosophy. Let's see.
Can I follow up
Yes.
with one question for John that I had posted there? And It's a quick one. Nobody ever did a reprint of this set, from what I could tell, when reprints were being done in the 80s and 90s, like Ted Fritsch and other companies that did a lot of Bowman and even Topps did their own reprints. Is there less concern about why did that not happen? Is it possible, or is it impossible in today's day and age, that somebody would actually do a legitimate reprint of this set? What would that take?
Well, here's probably what happens. I was actually listening to a podcast just today between Dan Wallach and Mike Ehrenstein from TCMA. And TCMA printed a number of reprint sets. And Mike Ehrenstein says, we basically did the sets that we could get the cards for. And it wouldn't surprise me in the case of 49 Leaf that short print second series is so tough to come by that someone just maybe doesn't have the access to good enough photographs or prints or whatever it might be that they would need to reproduce those cards. But at this point, I would not recommend anybody go ahead and reprint those. It kind of lies in a gray area of legality, so it's not something that I would recommend doing. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's as simple as people just couldn't find good enough copies of them to do it.
2 points that I kind of came across on that is that in 1997, when they were owned by Don Russ, they did produce one Jackie Robinson that's gold stamped, numbered to 1948, that were inserted in second series packs of 1997 Leaf cards. So in the roundabout kind of way of being an actual reproduction of a Leaf Jackie Robinson card, that's about as close as you're going to get to having one be actually authentic. And then the second thing, which is probably more of a question that John and I will have to discuss over a beer someday, is I don't know who owns the rights to the Leaf cards now, because as it was passed around and separated out as a company, the companies that owned Leaf went bankrupt. So I don't know where the rights to those cards actually sit now.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's an intriguing place to be. If I may say, I think we've done a great job covering a lot of material. I do have a record of all of the questions that came through here, and I plan to do a summary and a follow-up. If you have anything else that comes to mind, we're easy to find over there at the SABR Baseball Card blog, and John and Brian are each easy to find for their own professional sides. In their work that goes well beyond what you've seen here. Brian is, of course, a graphic artist. John is a author, historian, and very important, I think, to the overall understanding of where cards sit in the legal framework and history. Let's say thanks to all of them. And if there's anything else that you'd like to know more about in the future, please send us that feedback. Please send us ideas. Please send us questions. And you can look forward to more of those coming in 2025.
Great job.